for listeners, if you're not familiar, like an 8 show season, like that is a commitment. Like you are like, you're, it's not going to feel good. Right. And I mean, like, I don't think you can cut it any other way. Like, it's just, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to stick, to stay in it. Where were you at the end of the 22 season, mentally, physically, physiologically?
Oh, I was mentally checked out. I remember, and you know what? 2022 was such a great season. That's how I feel like I got on the board in terms of like people are like, "Oh, who is Liana?" So that was really cool. And we were riding that high. We really were. Like I was doing so well, so it was just like jumping into show after show after show to just like see how I compared. And I think my best placement was third place at 3 shows, which was amazing and very, very grateful for that. But I think it was after, so I actually competed abroad that year in Portugal. So July of 2022. That was such a cool experience. Definitely competing in a different country, but a chaotic one as well too. Nothing went right in terms of travel. Like getting there was an absolute nightmare. I actually didn't even think I was going to like make it to Portugal. Um, but when I did make it to Portugal, my like there was a lot of flight cancellations, delays, and all of my food ended up spoiling. So I had to consume foods that I've never consumed before, like what, 3 days, 4 days before I stepped on stage. So there was just so much stress. And I remember being like, okay, after the show, I'm done. And I don't know, I don't know what happened. We took like 2 months of just kind of like working my food back up to maintenance and, scaling back training a little bit. And then we just jumped right back into it. And I did 2 shows in October and I did well in the first show. I got third place, but then that last show, when you don't take photos at all, I didn't take one single photo that show, and I knew I was just mentally checked out. I was like, this is it. I'm done. Um, I need to rest, not only physically, but mentally as well. So like towards the end, I was like, yeah, it's time to rest right now. Like you've competed in 8 shows, like you're allowed to rest. So yeah, it was just that mental grit I couldn't push anymore. So I'm proud of myself for allowing myself to just chill after that.
Well, and I think that speaks to just the kind of person that you are, like being able to tap into, those feelings. And I say this a lot is like the disassociation in bodybuilding can be such an asset, but it can also be the bane of your competitive career. And like there are times where dissociation, compartmentalization, that can very much help you. And maybe it is appropriate, but also knowing that, I guess, being able to recognize like when it's too much and when you're not honoring yourself and when you're not regulating, you're not, I think of it more like self-parenting is like, okay, when is it starting to become like abuse and like you're just like beating the shit out of yourself? And I think that's one of those intangibles that in competing, like you have to be able to kind of like ebb and flow between like when is it time to like ask a little bit more of myself and then when is it time to really tune in and be like, okay, what do I need? Not what is competitorly need, what do I need to get through this and like so that I don't start building resentment and start, disliking what I'm doing.
Yeah. And not only like what does competitor lead need, but like I held a lot of guilt because I was thinking about the people watching. I was like, I can't stop now. Like everybody's rooting for me, everybody's cheering for me to get this Olympia qualification. And it's just like, Lee, it's like your first pro season. Um, Although it would be amazing to get an O qualification, like you really need to check in and like take care of your mental health right now. So I was able to like rid that guilt pretty quickly, but like that was a hard decision for me not only for myself, but like everybody who was just cheering me on. I didn't want to let anybody down, but I was letting myself down by just not checking in with myself mentally. So at the end of the day, it felt good to finally be selfish and, make a decision for myself. So yeah, that was the best decision to just stop after that.
So what did that look like going through that post-show phase? Because at that point, like, you're on empty, physiologically, and, like, I mean, sure, like, you're that close, so there's gotta be that, I'm sure, imagine that transition of, like, okay, now the goals need to look a little differently, both physically and how the physique is gonna look, but even from a health standpoint. How did that post-show look for you?
Trying to even remember. All I know is I did not take enough time to mentally rest. I remember jumping into the 2023 season fairly quickly. I don't even, I think I gave myself like 3 months to chill, maybe. Um, and granted, it's like you competed all year, like the entirety of 2022, and you only allowed yourself 3 months to just jump right back into it. So I remember not allowing myself to I think it was actually 4 months, but still, I definitely needed a little bit longer to, just, like, mentally reframe, but that's where the dissociation piece comes in. It's like, "Oh, well, I've done it before, so let me just do it again." But that was the hardest season for me in terms of how low my calories got and how high my cardio got because my body was holding on to so much stress that it wasn't responding as efficiently as we would have liked it to. So my calories had to get the lowest they ever had to go because like my body was so stressed. But I was so set on doing Tampa Pro and I was like push, push, push. Um Now, like, looking back, I'm just like, I can never do that again. But it's like we have to go through these things on our own to figure out, like, what works best for our bodies, and, at the where I am right now in life is just like, I would never put myself through that mentally again, and it was very what's the word I'm looking for? Not I guess immature of me to think that like 4 months would just like, "Oh, I'm mentally better now. I'm mentally rested." So now I know it takes much longer than that. Um, but I was just so excited to get back on stage and I didn't do poor in 2023 when it came to placing. But I definitely could have done better if I just really put a focus on my mental well-being that year. So that's why I only did 2 shows in 2023.
I think a lot of people, they can oversimplify that post-show period and make it something that's like, well, if we come out and nail the reverse week 1 and we get our bloods back and everything looks good, then yeah, just suck it up and just gear up for the next season. And that's something that like I can definitely relate to, the guilt and the pressure around like, okay, like how do I continue with the identity, the part of myself that, very much enjoys competing and likes pushing myself? How do I continue feeding that part while also understanding that that might not be what's best for me right now? Like I might actually be worse off. And I think, especially seeing success on stage, like objective success, and then having that kind of support that, you've had, it can make it feel like, okay, like how how can I even fathom like going the opposite direction of, what everyone's telling me is like my destiny and like what, is just on the other side of a couple more shows. But um, you mentioned like just being so ragged, like mentally, physically by the end of it, and like knowing like I need to take time off. And I definitely, although my season was much shorter, in 22, it was the mental strain of self-coaching, and even though I had John, in my corner, like, a large majority of it was self-coached, and, like, I mean, he was very much, like, bumper rails, and seeing, like, the body fat now, I'm like, "Okay, like, I get why I felt like shit." Like, it was just complete, like, goggles on, and I remember by the Mile High, like, I changed my flight, like, pretty much getting off stage, and it's not that I did poorly, but I was just, like, mentally, I was like I called John, I was like, "I'm I'm okay with ending the season now. Like, I actually don't feel like I have any more to give." And as much as, like, going into those shows, I was like, "I think I wanna do, like, 5, 6 shows, and I can, like, time them. They'll all be, like, 1 week apart, 2 weeks apart." But it was, like, that drag of, like, the Night of Champions, then to the Mile High being, like, a 5, 6 no, it wasn't 6, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. That holding that conditioning, like, and also just being very just too lean. Like, that really, really crept up, and I think, for a lot of athletes, they can, map out these timelines and these plans, and they're great in theory, and they make sense, but in, like, practicality, it's like, you gotta pay down that debt at some point, and the more that you try to ignore that, the more it catches up with you, and seeing it catch up with myself and seeing it catch up with clients, like, post-show, I mean, like, that I know is just so rough for people, and um, going back to giving yourself not enough time, what what did that feel like mentally for you in that phase, in that 3 to 4 month gap where you're like, like gearing up for the next season, but like still kind of like imagine like pushing some of those feelings down?
Mhm. I remember being it was mm, I experienced extreme low frequency, vibrations during that time. Like, I was sad, I was lost. I remember secluding myself for almost the entirety of those 4 months. Um, I didn't have energy to talk to anybody. I didn't like, I don't even know where my motivation went. It was just a very it was a very lonely time, I remember. And then in my head, past versionly, I was like, "Oh, how I get out of this is just going back into another bodybuilding prep. Like, then I'll be able to see the light again. It'll fuel my fire again." Um, a very, I know that immature way of thinking, but um, again, it's just like that dissociation. It's like, "Oh, like, let me get back to it." Because in my head, it's like, all I know is bodybuilding. Like, that is my life. Like, I don't know anything other than that. And I think now, uh, you know, it all of 2024, it's like I am so much more than bodybuilding, and I'm really happy I evolved from that mindset. But it could be a really dark place thinking that, ending a season and jumping back into another one is what's going to bring that happiness and light back into your life, and that's just such a skewed way of thinking, but that's literally all I knew at the time. So, I remember it being, uh I was very lost. I remember being very lost during that time. Um, and I also wasn't in Colorado either, so I felt like I didn't have like anybody to lean on either. So that's what I mean by like super like very secluded. Um so I kind of was just like in my head for those 4 months. Um and I was like, "Oh, yeah, how I got out of it. Let's jump into another prep." And that's when it came crashing down. Um because I walked through it having such immense stress. Your body's not gonna respond. So, I've never seen my calories get that low before. I've never seen my cardio get that high before. But I had to do what I had to do to, get the look that we wanted, get the condition that we wanted. But I'm like, wow, when you step out of it, you're like, stress wreaks so much havoc on the body. And it's crazy how it could push, and it's like sometimes you don't even know that you're stressed, and then you get your blood work done, it's like, "Oh, that's very eye-opening."